Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Before we dive into today's chilling story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. Today, we're traveling back to 1911, to a small town in rural Pennsylvania, where a seemingly innocent school photograph would uncover one of the most disturbing mysteries in American educational history. If you enjoy stories that blur the line between reality and the unexplained, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss our upcoming macabre tales. Now, let's begin our journey into the past. The autumn of 1911 painted the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, in shades of amber and crimson. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, the town was home to barely 300 souls, most of whom worked in the local lumber mill or tended to modest farms that dotted the landscape. At the heart of this quiet community stood a single-room schoolhouse, its white clapboard siding weathered by countless seasons, where children from ages 6 to 14 gathered each day under the watchful eye of their teacher. Margaret Whitmore had arrived in Millbrook that September, carrying little more than a worn leather satchel and a letter of recommendation from the State Education Board. She was a woman of perhaps 30 years, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that held both kindness and an unmistakable sadness. The townspeople had welcomed her politely but distantly, as was their way with strangers. In the place where families had lived for generations, newcomers were viewed with cautious curiosity. The schoolhouse itself was a testament to simpler times. Wooden desks arranged in neat rows faced a blackboard that had seen decades of chalk dust and children's dreams. A pot-bellied stove in the corner provided warmth during the harsh Pennsylvania winters, and tall windows allowed natural light to illuminate the pages of well-worn textbooks. It was here that Margaret began her work, teaching arithmetic, reading, and penmanship to 23 eager young minds. From her first day, there was something different about Margaret Whitmore. The children sensed it immediately, that peculiar ability young people have to detect what adults cannot. She moved through the classroom with an ethereal grace, her voice carrying a distant quality that seemed to echo from somewhere far away. When she wrote on the blackboard, her hand trembled slightly, as if fighting against some invisible force. Yet her lessons were thorough, her patience seemingly endless, and her care for each child genuine. But what if I told you this teacher wasn't alive at all? Stick around, because the truth will send chills down your spine. Sarah Thompson, the town's postmistress and unofficial keeper of local gossip, had been among the first to notice the oddities. Margaret never received mail, never ordered anything from the general store's catalog, and was never seen entering or leaving her boarding room at Mrs. Henderson's house. When Sarah mentioned this to her husband over dinner, he merely shrugged and said that some people valued their privacy, but privacy in a town of 300 was nearly impossible to maintain. The children began to whisper among themselves about their strange new teacher. 8-year-old Timothy Morrison swore he had seen her standing in the schoolyard at midnight, perfectly still under the moonlight. His older sister, Rebecca, claimed that Margaret's reflection in the schoolhouse windows seemed fainter than it should be, as if she were made of morning mist rather than flesh and blood. October brought with it the annual Harvest Festival, a cherished tradition that brought the entire community together. The town photographer, a traveling man named Harold Finch, made his yearly visit to document the festivities and take the customary school photograph. This tradition had been maintained for over a decade, creating a visual record of Millbrook's children as they grew from year to year. On the morning of October 15th, the children gathered in front of the schoolhouse, their faces scrubbed clean and their Sunday best pressed and ready. Margaret stood behind them, her hands resting gently on the shoulders of the two eldest students. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the schoolyard, and a slight breeze stirred the fallen leaves at their feet. Harold Finch, a portly man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, adjusted his camera with practiced efficiency. He had been taking photographs for nearly 20 years, traveling from town to town with his equipment loaded in a horse-drawn wagon. His reputation for capturing the essence of small-town life had made him a welcome visitor throughout rural Pennsylvania. "Now everyone hold perfectly still," Harold called out, his head disappearing beneath the black cloth of his camera. "This will only take a moment." The children stood motionless, their faces serious with the importance of the occasion. Margaret's presence behind them was calming, reassuring. For a brief moment, everything seemed perfectly normal in the little town of Millbrook. The camera clicked, capturing that single moment in time. Harold emerged from beneath his cloth with a satisfied smile. "Perfect," he announced. "I'll have the prints ready by next week." As the children dispersed, chattering excitedly about the photograph, Margaret lingered in the schoolyard. The October air had grown crisp, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. There was something in her expression, a mixture of sadness and resignation, that seemed to suggest she knew something the others did not. Imagine capturing a memory that reveals a secret no one saw coming. That's exactly what happened next. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow who ran the boarding house, approached the school later that afternoon to collect the monthly rent from Margaret. She knocked on the classroom door, then entered when there was no response. The room was empty, though the lessons for the next day were already written on the blackboard in Margaret's careful script. "Miss Whitmore," Mrs. Henderson called out, her voice echoing in the empty room. "Margaret." She climbed the narrow stairs to the small apartment above the schoolhouse where Margaret was supposed to be staying, but found it completely undisturbed. The bed was made, the few personal belongings still in their places. Yet something felt wrong. The air was cold, unnaturally so, and carried a strange stillness that made Mrs. Henderson's skin crawl. That evening, when Margaret failed to appear for dinner at the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson grew concerned. She mentioned it to Dr. William Hayes, the town's physician, who agreed to check on the teacher the following morning. Dr. Hayes was a practical man who had served Millbrook for over 30 years. He had seen birth and death, sickness and health, and prided himself on his rational approach to medicine. When he arrived at the schoolhouse the next morning, he found the children waiting outside, confused and worried about their missing teacher. "Has anyone seen Miss Whitmore?" he asked the group. The children shook their heads, their faces filled with genuine concern. Young Timothy Morrison stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Hayes," he said, "something's not right about Miss Whitmore. She feels different from other grown-ups." Dr. Hayes knelt down to the boy's level, his expression gentle but skeptical. "Different how, Timothy?" "She's cold," the boy replied. "Not mean cold, but cold like winter. And sometimes when she talks, it sounds like she's very far away." Dr. Hayes dismissed the boy's concerns as childhood imagination and entered the schoolhouse. The room was exactly as it had been left, with lessons prepared and everything in its proper place. He climbed to the apartment above, conducting a thorough search, but found no trace of where Margaret might have gone. Days passed without any sign of their missing teacher. The town constable, a young man named James Mitchell, organized search parties that combed the surrounding forests and questioned every resident. No one had seen Margaret leave town, yet she was nowhere to be found. It was as if she had simply vanished into the October air. The mystery deepened when Harold Finch returned to town with the developed photographs. He had set up a small display in the general store, as was his custom, allowing townspeople to purchase copies of the Harvest Festival pictures. The school photograph was prominently displayed, showing the 23 children arranged in their careful rows with their teacher standing behind them, but something was wrong with the image. Sarah Thompson was among the first to notice it. She had stopped by to purchase a copy of the photograph for her own children when something about the picture caught her attention. She studied it carefully, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Harold," she called to the photographer, who was arranging other pictures nearby. "There's something odd about this school photograph." Harold joined her, adjusting his spectacles to look at the image more closely. "What do you mean, Mrs. Thompson?" "The teacher," Sarah said, pointing to the figure standing behind the children. "Look at her. She seems faded somehow." Harold examined the photograph with a professional eye. He had to admit that Sarah was right. Margaret's image appeared less distinct than those of the children, as if the camera had somehow failed to capture her completely. Her figure was translucent, ghostly, barely visible against the background of the schoolhouse. "That's curious," Harold muttered. I've never seen anything quite like this before. It might be a problem with the photographic plate or perhaps the lighting conditions that day. But even as he offered these rational explanations, Harold felt a chill run down his spine. In 20 years of photography, he had never encountered anything remotely similar. Word of the strange photograph spread quickly through Millbrook. People came from all over town to see it for themselves, each offering their own theories about what might have caused the peculiar effect. Some suggested it was simply a flaw in the photographic process, while others whispered about more supernatural possibilities. Dr. Hayes, ever the skeptic, examined the photograph with a magnifying glass borrowed from the general store. Under close inspection, Margaret's image was even more disturbing. Not only was she translucent, but there seemed to be something wrong with her expression, a hollow, distant look that hadn't been apparent to the naked eye on the day the photograph was taken. "This is highly unusual," Dr. Hayes admitted to Harold Finch. "I've seen hundreds of photographs in my time, but never anything quite like this." Meanwhile, the search for Margaret continued, but with each passing day, hope of finding her alive diminished. The constable had contacted neighboring towns, sent telegrams to the state authorities, and even reached out to the education board that had originally recommended her for the position. It was this last inquiry that would provide the most shocking revelation of all. 3 weeks after Margaret's disappearance, Constable Mitchell received a telegram from the state education board. His hands shook as he read the message, his face growing pale with each word. He immediately sought out Dr. Hayes, finding him at his office reviewing patient files. "Doctor," Mitchell said, his voice strained, "we need to talk. It's about Miss Whitmore." Dr. Hayes looked up from his paperwork, noting the constable's obvious distress. "What is it, James? Have you found her?" Mitchell shook his head slowly, then handed over the telegram. "Read this." Dr. Hayes took the telegram and read it carefully. His expression grew increasingly grave as he absorbed the contents of the message. When he finished, he looked up at Mitchell with disbelief in his eyes. "This can't be right," Dr. Hayes said quietly. The telegram was brief, but devastating. "No record of Margaret Whitmore in our employment. No teacher by that name assigned to Millbrook. Please verify identity and credentials immediately." The two men stared at each other in stunned silence. If the education board had no record of Margaret, then who had been teaching their children for the past month? How had she arrived in town with what appeared to be official documentation? Dr. Hayes stood up abruptly, his mind racing with the implications. "We need to examine her belongings again. There has to be something we missed." They returned to the schoolhouse, this time conducting a more thorough search of Margaret's living quarters. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard, they discovered a small wooden box containing personal effects that would change everything they thought they knew about their mysterious teacher. Inside the box were several items: a tarnished silver locket, a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, and, most shocking of all, a death certificate dated September 3, 1911, nearly 2 weeks before Margaret Whitmore had supposedly arrived in Millbrook. Dr. Hayes examined the death certificate with trembling hands. It was issued by a hospital in Pittsburgh and listed the cause of death as consumption, tuberculosis. According to the document, Margaret Whitmore had died in a charity ward, alone and forgotten. Her body buried in an unmarked grave in the city's Potter's Field. The letters revealed the tragic story of Margaret's life. She had been an orphan who had worked tirelessly to become a teacher, dreaming of making a difference in children's lives. She had applied for teaching positions throughout Pennsylvania, but her illness had prevented her from securing a permanent position. The letters were rejections from various school districts, each one crushing her hopes a little more. The locket contained a small photograph of a group of children, presumably from one of her brief teaching assignments. On the back was inscribed, "To Miss Whitmore, the best teacher we ever had. Your students, 1910. As Dr. Hayes and Constable Mitchell absorbed this information, the pieces of the puzzle began to form a picture that challenged everything they believed about the nature of life and death. Margaret Whitmore had died in Pittsburgh, but somehow her spirit had found its way to Millbrook, drawn perhaps by her unfulfilled desire to teach and care for children. The constable looked at the photograph on the wall, now understanding why Margaret's image appeared so faint and ghostly. "Doctor," he said quietly, "what do we tell the townspeople? What do we tell the children?" Dr. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, weighing the implications of what they had discovered. The rational part of his mind rejected the supernatural explanation, yet the evidence was undeniable. Margaret had been dead for weeks before she appeared in their town. Yet she had taught their children with genuine care and dedication. "We tell them the truth," Dr. Hayes finally said. "But we tell it carefully. This town has seen enough mystery and fear." That evening, Dr. Hayes called a town meeting in the schoolhouse where Margaret had spent her final weeks among the living. The entire population of Millbrook gathered, their faces filled with curiosity and concern. The school photograph sat prominently displayed, Margaret's ghostly image serving as a reminder of the mystery that had captured their small community. Dr. Hayes began by explaining their discoveries, the false credentials, the death certificate, and the tragic story of Margaret Whitmore's life. The room erupted in murmurs and gasps as people struggled to comprehend what they were hearing. "But that's impossible," protested Mrs. Henderson. "I spoke with her every day. She was as real as any of us. She taught my children," added Thomas Morrison, Timothy's father. "She helped my boy with his reading. How could a dead woman do such things?" Dr. Hayes raised his hand for silence. "I know this is difficult to accept. I'm a man of science, and I've spent my entire career dealing with facts and evidence, but sometimes the evidence leads us to conclusions that challenge our understanding of the world." Young Timothy Morrison, who had been unusually quiet throughout the meeting, suddenly spoke up. "She wasn't scary," he said in his small voice. "Miss Whitmore was nice. She helped us learn, and she made us feel safe." His words echoed the sentiments of all the children who had been in Margaret's class. Despite the shocking revelation of her true nature, they remembered her with fondness and gratitude. She had been, in every way that mattered, a dedicated teacher who had cared deeply for their education and well-being. As the meeting continued, the townspeople gradually came to accept the impossible truth. Margaret Whitmore had somehow returned from death to fulfill her life's purpose, to teach children and make a positive difference in their lives. Her spirit had found its way to Millbrook, drawn by the opportunity to finally achieve what had been denied to her in life. The photograph remained as the only physical proof of her presence among them. Harold Finch, after much consideration, decided to make copies available to anyone who wanted them. Many families purchased the image not as a curiosity or supernatural artifact, but as a memento of the teacher who had touched their children's lives, however briefly. In the weeks that followed, life in Millbrook gradually returned to normal. A new teacher was hired, a young woman from Harrisburg who came with impeccable credentials and references. The children adjusted to their new instructor, though many privately admitted that they missed Miss Whitmore's gentle manner and patient teaching style. The story of the ghostly teacher became part of Millbrook's local folklore, passed down from generation to generation. Some visitors came to the town hoping to experience something supernatural, but they were always disappointed. Margaret Whitmore had completed her mission. There was no reason for her to linger. Years later, when the children who had known Margaret were adults with children of their own, they would sometimes tell the story of their remarkable teacher. They spoke not of ghosts or supernatural encounters, but of a woman who had dedicated herself so completely to education that not even death could prevent her from fulfilling her calling. The 1911 school photograph was eventually donated to the local historical society, where it remains on display to this day. Visitors can see the faint ghostly figure of Margaret Whitmore standing behind her students, a testament to the power of dedication and love that transcends the boundaries between life and death. Dr. Hayes, who lived well into his 80s, never spoke publicly about his role in uncovering Margaret's secret. But in his private journals discovered after his death, he wrote extensively about the experience and what it had taught him about the nature of human purpose and determination. "I have always prided myself on being a rational man," he wrote in one entry, "but Margaret Whitmore taught me that there are forces in this world that operate beyond the realm of medical science or logical explanation. Love, dedication, and the desire to help others can be more powerful than death itself. The schoolhouse where Margaret taught still stands today, though it has long since been converted to a community center. Local historians note that it maintains an unusually peaceful atmosphere, and children who visit often comment on how comfortable and safe they feel within its walls. On quiet autumn evenings, when the light fades and shadows grow long across the Pennsylvania countryside, some residents of Millbrook claim they can still see a figure in the old schoolyard, a woman in a long dress, standing motionless as if watching over the town's children. Whether this is merely the product of imagination or something more, no one can say for certain. But one thing's for sure, her story proves that true passion doesn't die, it inspires forever. What do you think? Could love really conquer death? Let us know in the comments. The children of Millbrook grow up knowing the story of Miss Margaret Whitmore, the teacher who loved her calling so much that she returned from death to fulfill it. They learn that dedication and love can overcome even the greatest obstacles, and that sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. The 1911 school photograph serves as a reminder that truth can be stranger than fiction, and that the human spirit's capacity for love and service knows no earthly bounds. In a world increasingly driven by cynicism and self-interest, the story of Margaret Whitmore stands as a testament to the transformative power of education and the eternal nature of compassion. As the years pass and the photograph fades with age, the image of Margaret Whitmore becomes even more ethereal, as if she is slowly returning to the realm from which she came. But her impact on the children she taught, and on the town that briefly became her home, remains as vivid and meaningful as ever. The mystery of the 1911 school photograph was solved, but it left behind questions that reach far beyond the small town of Millbrook. It challenges us to consider what drives us in life, what legacies we leave behind, and whether love and dedication are truly stronger than death itself. In the end, Margaret Whitmore achieved in death what had eluded her in life. She became the teacher she had always dreamed of being, touching young lives and making a lasting difference. Her story reminds us that sometimes the most profound mysteries are not about the supernatural or unexplained, but about the extraordinary power of the human heart to love, serve, and inspire others, even in the face of impossible circumstances. And so the legend of Millbrook's ghostly teacher lives on, not as a tale of horror or supernatural terror, but as a story of hope, dedication, and the enduring power of education to transform lives even from beyond the grave.